We're starting this meeting out late. We have committee members present, Mr. Jay Bemke, Mr. Joe Zerflu, as well as attending Mr. Shane Blazer, Mayor. Also, we have Mr. Ryan Hartman, our HR manager, and Ms. Sue Schill, City Attorney, as with our IT crew is here. With that, I will call the meeting is called to order. Item number 2, discuss and consider for approval extending the current employee emergency paid leave policy due to the COVID-19 pandemic through June 30th, 2021, and adding the following additional conditions under which the employee may use the leave. Items A through D here I'll read. Item 1, item A, employee is seeking for awaiting the result of the diagnostic test for or a medical diagnosis of COVID-19, and such employee has been exposed to COVID-19. B, the city has requested such test or diagnosis. C, employee is obtaining immunization related to COVID-19, and D, employee is recovering from injury, disability, illness, or condition related to COVID-19 immunization. With that, I'll open up the floor. Is there any committee members that have any questions or concerns with this? Anybody else? Questions, concerns with item number 2? Mr. Hartman, will you kind of speak on this for the moment here?
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. So what we are intending to do with this, with the vaccines becoming more and more readily available, with the last COVID leave extension, with the emergency leave that was offered at the beginning of the year, that expired at the end of March. What we are asking for with the vaccines and the potential side effects of an employee maybe not feeling the best after the first or second dose, or along with the other issues that you mentioned above, that they would still be able to utilize any remaining hours they had left from the emergency paid leave. So basically an extension of the time frame from the end of March through said date for remaining hours that they may have due to the ongoing COVID pandemic.
Anybody have any further questions specifically for that? With that being said, I'll make a motion for approval. Motion on the floor by Kubishak, second by Bemke for approval. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Ayes have it, 3-0. We'll go on to item number 3, discuss and consider for approval a professional services agreement with Carlson Detman Consulting to provide a classification and compensation study for non-represented positions within the city. Any committee members have anything specific for this?
I kind of do.
Go ahead, Mr. Zerflu.
Just personal experience with the company here. You have an appeals process that's optional. The problem is that there could be potentially none or potentially several employees that are maybe unhappy with how the study comes out. I kind of feel that it is important to have an appeals process, although the $200 per review kind of is a source of a little bit of caution, because I mean, if there's 4 employees, it's not a big deal. If there's 50, it is a big deal. I don't know if there's a way around that or whatever. I mean, it's a well-known company. I don't have any problems, with the company, but it's just maybe the terms there. And I don't know if someone's on the line or if there's some sort of other workaround to that or whatever.
Yeah, I believe Deb Poggle is on. Deb, are you on? Deb, are you able to hear us?
It looked like her voice was being picked up. It came up on here. Something microphone was picking up because her name was displayed across here. Deb, are you available for any comment or questions?
Can you guys hear in Zoom land currently?
I can hear you on the phone. I got you on the phone. Hello?
Got you now.
Deb, is that you?
Hello?
Deb, this is Ryan.
Hello? Hello? Hello, does somebody want me? No.
Let me recall the number. They might not be picking us up for some reason.
Tom, we're trying to get a hold of Deb here. We're in between here. Mr. Zerflu would ask a question, and Ms. Deb Bogle is on the interweb here somewhere. We lost her, and we're just kind of waiting to see if we can get a hold of her.
Welcome to Zoom. Enter your meeting ID followed by pound. Enter your participant ID followed by pound. You are in the meeting now. There are 7 participants in the meeting. This meeting is being recorded.
Hey, Deb, can you hear us now?
I can hear you now. Can you hear me?
Yep, can do. Can one of you guys talk?
Perfect.
See if we can hear you. Deb, are you able to hear me? This is Ryan Hartman.
I can hear you now, Ryan.
All right, thanks, Deb. Deb, Joe Zerflu had a question, and we're wondering, or I'm wondering if it might not just be in the best interest of they might have similar questions. If you would be willing to just kind of talk us through the process. I don't know if you're able to hear Joe's question. It was in regards to the optional portion of the appeals process, and I know that's something you and I had talked about. So if you could just kind of maybe walk us through your experience and this process that we're looking at.
Sure. Oftentimes the appeal process was put in there really more to deal with collectively bargained types of positions. So as we talked earlier, it really would be my recommendation that you don't really have an appeal process. And that appeal, if there's something that needs to be done or changed, it's part of an annual review of the job description and looking at things then because, and let me know if you guys can't hear me, but as part of what we're doing in going through this whole analysis, comp analysis, and review of job descriptions and market analysis. We've gone through that. So when you have individuals coming in and appealing, it's really, we're valuing the job. We're not valuing the people that are in the positions. So just having that whole appeal process in there in non-collectively bargained types of positions oftentimes causes real issues for organizations.
Does that answer your question, Mr. Zerflu?
I mean, I understand what you're saying, Deb. My only thing is what if, is there a step that an employee or a group of employees can take then if they feel that their position was undervalued?
Well, part of what we're really hoping for, Joe, is through the process that we have transparency, that supervisors and managers are working with their employees to accurately capture what their roles and responsibilities are. And, as we're talking about that and where we're placing them, our intent, as we've talked through this, is to have that upfront transparency so that we don't have that. Now, that doesn't mean that they're not gonna necessarily agree with us, because again, you can't put a value on the human side of it. So I'm not saying that we shouldn't at some point in time potentially listen if there's some valid things, but for us to put in there that we have an actual grievance process and an appeal process just kind of really opens the door for that. And I think as we look forward and put the processes that you're going to go through together, I would recommend to say that on an annual basis, these positions will be looked at as we're looking at what the percentage increase might be approved and looking at it. I think any employee should always be able to feel free to come forward to HR and have some discussion. But if you have a formal grievance, what are they going to base their feelings on that we haven't assessed it? And again, if we're transparent up front and we go through it and we have the comparisons and we have the internal equity comparisons and looking at that, we should be able to eliminate that feeling that people have that their positions are undervalued.
I do understand that, and I appreciate that, and I'm glad to hear that there will be transparency. I just don't know how I feel leaving that out and at least giving them an option to make a case. And like I said earlier, I am familiar with Carlson Detman. I know you guys. You're a well-reputed company, and I'm not saying I don't mean to insinuate that you wouldn't be transparent or anything like that, but my personal feeling is not to cut out an appeals process. But you did answer my question, I guess. I appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Zerflu, I'm wondering if this is more contract language, that it's a fee for service, if we had sought it as an organization. But I think that we have, through the HR committee as well as HR department, we could create our own appeal process with that. But it's just something that they say, hey, we're going to charge you for if you guys want to try and, do something moving forward. If you want to have the third party do that, you know what I mean?
So yes, and I know exactly what you mean. And if an employee was not satisfied with their rating through Carlson Detman, and there was no appeals process, and they wanted to appeal directly to HR, the committee, I would be fine with that. I'm just not sure. As long as the contract doesn't cause any issues with that, I don't see why it would, because their services essentially would be done. But.
Yeah, I think, and I could be wrong, but I think what it actually is something like, if the organization didn't want to deal with that, they're like,
right,
it's too sticky, we're not going to get involved with employees, asking for wages. Do you guys, as a third party, do that? And they said, yeah, we'll do it for $200 a pop. That's probably why they have that language in there.
And I understand that, and I know the appeals process is not about the employee. It is about the position. Regardless how many people fill that, I do understand that. Doesn't really change my sentiment necessarily, but, I mean,
Just so we know, joined us is Patrick from Carlson Detman, and then Deb on the phone is our consulting HR person. And we did talk about this earlier, and you're right. It's about positions and not people. And sometimes, I think part of our problem that we currently have is that, people like to appeal to HR. And I don't know in the past where HR has ever denied a request for a salary adjustment or a wage adjustment. And part of that has caused our problem is we're looking at individual positions and not groups. And so we have an inequity going on amongst departments and internally within departments because we've made these one-off adjustments. And so that'd be my concern on an appeal process, is that we would get back into that problem where, Thad's doing a great job and we think he's really good and he deserves more money because he's a really great employee, but realistically the position only has a certain set value and that's determined by the market. So that's one of my concerns, that if we do look at an appeal process, is that we need to take the human aspect out of it and look at the job.
I agree with everything you just said. And that's why I want to reiterate, I know the appeals process is not an individual employee, saying that I deserve. It is appealing the rating that's been assigned to them. And I do understand we've kind of learned our lesson. We don't want individual employees approaching us unless it's like to go up a step or something or whatever maybe. But I don't know that this would even necessarily completely alleviate that unless you just didn't want to hear an argument. But the appeals process is for the position. Like, for example, HR director. Let's say there were 10 of them. Probably a bad example, right? But let's say one person wasn't happy with how it came out. They're not appealing just for them. They're appealing for everybody that would fall into that. Is that not true? No. Okay.
Patrick, you represent Carlton Detman in this particular situation. Did you piggyback on the question that Mr. Zerflu, committee member, had previously about, that's what we're talking about, is the appeal process? Do you have anything to interject with that at all?
I guess, and I wasn't here for the full breadth of the question, but I think I've captured enough of what you're looking for, that one, it's an optional service, so we can have this conversation as we move our way down the process to see where we go. We try to do a lot of work, in the project to alleviate that. If we know a position is going to be a problem, if we know there's an especially challenging recruitment history, here's the grade where our system says it belongs, but we know we can't find it, and maybe the market data suggests it should be a grade higher, or there's compression issues usually in a police or fire department where they tend to show up, that there's usually probably 5 to 10 different conversations even before we get to the end of a project about these positions. We're usually not surprised, when an appeal comes, that we again, with our conversations we have with departments, so on and so forth, we tend to have a sense of what those hot button issues are. And even from the process of appeals, we try to mitigate a client's cost in that we break it out into 2 phases. One, I would say, is the informational phase. The other one is the appeal phase. That when we get done with the project, an employee says, I don't like how this feels, or I'm curious, that we provide the employee with the rating levels for their job free of charge. There's no fee associated with that. And we provide them I would say it's a little bit more than a superficial, certainly not a deep dive into the job evaluation system, but enough information to appreciate what we look at. And then they get a chance to decide if they want to appeal. And my experience with that sort of a process is about, if you had 10 appeals, pre-appeals, asking for information, only 5 show up as a formal appeal. So we tend to see a number of those drop off the table once they have a chance to kick the tires and see, okay, here's what we were looking at. Here's how we rated the job from an educational standpoint. Here's how we rated it from a decision making. And, like I said, many employees look at it and say, okay, might not love where I land, but I understand where it is, and I don't see any need to move forward. So it's more of an interactive process, because we meet with the department heads, in the middle of the project, to talk about, their jobs, their challenges. Again, we tend to have a better appreciation for, and hopefully had some of those issues off at the pass.
Mr. Zerflu, does that satisfy your question?
Satisfied, but it's fair enough.
Do you want to appeal that answer?
No, I don't. Not for $200. No.
People, you raise a good point. You say something that I think is very valid in terms of why are we charging again for a position we've already reviewed, is that I would say at any point during the process, and it's not a matter of that when we get a JDQ or a job description, because we can work from both, we're probably reading through that in various, maybe it's going back to this paragraph or that paragraph, between 5 and 10 times, when we're comparing positions to one another. When we get to the appeal, it's a pretty significant investment of time in terms of re-reviewing the documentation, reviewing what the appeals information is, as well as the interactive dialogue that would occur with the department head, with HR. And so it's a significant investment of time, even on the appeals piece. We don't think it's worth charging the full price of a job, that we did during the project, because we have reviewed it. We do have a history. We do have the context. But I think you raise a very good point that, why do we charge a fee for that? We used to build it into our projects, and we found that when you build it in, there's more license for the employees to say, oh, there's nothing left to lose here, and let's just, throw something at the wall and see if we can appeal, because it doesn't hurt to appeal. And so what we decided is take it out of our base fee, build it in as an option, because you get a choice, then you can decide if you want to spend that money, and then let's devise a system where it's not layers upon layers of red tape to do an appeal, but it should be difficult to say, if you made an error in the documentation, or if for some reason it wasn't clear why it should be rated, then let's talk about that as a fee. So, but it's a very good point you make, like I said, as it relates to why is there an extra fee.
You still got the floor, Joe, if you got any other questions.
No other questions.
Mr. Bemke, I know that you had some questions or concerns. Go ahead.
So I guess if you're still there, I think two things with you, and then I'll have a couple questions for the rep. But Deb, maybe could you just tell us who's going to be included in this study? And could you maybe describe the committee that you're talking about putting together to kind of review and observe the process?
Sure. And can you guys hear me okay again?
Yes.
Okay. So I will be heavily involved working with Patrick and Ryan as far as the committee. We want between 5 and 7 individuals from the organization to be part of that. I think it's going to be really important to have finance, which would likely be Tim. Public Works should have someone at a supervisor level. And then I think as you really look at it, taking guidance from Ryan and some of the other departments, and Patrick, of course, can help provide some guidance. I don't think that you want a staff level person or general labor individual, because sometimes you're going to get into a little bit more in-depth discussions, as Patrick talked about, how are we ranking in an education level and how are we doing the things like that. So we don't, at least historically, I haven't typically seen staff level individuals involved. You also don't want to get that committee too large, but what that committee will do is work closely with Patrick and others to help pull the information together, to help create that transparency that is needed to the different departments. So that committee will then, when you get the managers, the supervisors, will be talking. They're going to have a good, strong understanding of the dynamics of what's happening. So they really are a lot of the advocates to help make sure that individuals at all levels of the organization understand what's going on and what the process is and how we're doing things and things like that. So does that answer that question, Jay? Mm-hmm.
Sorry, the first part of yes, it did answer the question, and I guess my first question is can you maybe just describe who's going to be included in this study, the city employees that are going to be included?
Oh, the positions, well, we haven't really determined the approximately 55 positions at this point. We'll work with that committee, we'll work with Patrick and, get the majority because, obviously we know that there's a few more than 55 positions, but part of this process is also going to help us consolidate so that we don't have a lot of one-off types of positions. We might right now have 5 different administrative assistant level positions, where in essence they really all do the same thing. So trying to do some collapsing of different positions at this point. So we really haven't gone into depth to determine exactly what those 55 positions will be, but that will be part of that very front end to look at it and gather those positions that we want to take a look at and then decide where we're going to go with consolidating some of the other potential positions from that standpoint.
Deb, what I think he's asking is it'll be all employees except for police and fire that will be looked at?
Right, right. Yeah. Okay, I apologize. Yeah, we're at this point because there's collective bargaining agreements associated with both fire and police. We're going to leave both of those out, and we're not going to select even the non-bargained positions within those entities at this point. That's not to say that down the road you shouldn't take a look at the non-collectively bargained positions within the fire or within the police, but the study that we're looking at now, because the majority, 75% of your population, approximately give or take, is really outside of fire and police.
Thank you.
Is there anybody else? Mr. Rayom, I know you're out on internet world out there. Do you got any questions or concerns for either Deb or our representative Patrick here? Okay, Mr. Bemke wasn't done asking questions here. He was done asking questions of Deb, but I guess he wants to ask other questions. All right, Mr. Bemke, you have the floor.
So I guess first of all, would you like to, do you have anything you'd like to walk us through before we start asking questions?
Oh, goodness, I feel like I'm coming into this kind of halfway through the conversation, so I don't know what you've discussed thus far, so I apologize for that.
No, you've pretty much heard the majority of the conversation, so if there's anything you'd like to throw out there before we...
Why don't I let you fire your questions first, and that might inform in terms of kind of where I might want to head with overall perspective.
Oh, I guess my question to you is, when you do these evaluations or these comps, is Deb and Ryan going to have access? Are they going to know who the comps are?
Oh my goodness, yes. Yeah, yes. So when it comes to comparable communities, that's a key question for the organization, because when we talk about building your pay structure, and let's just say you decide as an organization, like pretty much every other organization, hey, let's pay at the 50th percentile of our market. That's pretty standard fare. The magic is 50th percentile of what? And so if you compared to communities of less than 50,000 population, that's going to be a substantial difference than if you were to look at communities of comparable or, maybe a little bit larger. And so, how does Stevens Point play in the mix? Wausau, Marshfield, you keep going down that list of communities, as opposed to you go down the road, Nakusa, Port Edwards, doesn't make sense necessarily for an organization. So not only would Ryan and Deb, that if the council, had a definitive opinion on that as well, that should be taken into account. Because like I said, that's one of our first policy questions we need to resolve. We can certainly provide you what we think is appropriate. I don't know if we did that originally or not, but we've got some pretty decent data sources to at least kind of hone in on what you might want to look at and give you a list of 15, 20, 25, and then pare it down from there. And another key conversation point when it comes to that is, who have you compared yourself to in the past? And when we look at this, and it's it's probably a good distinction to make right now, that when we look at marketplaces, essentially there's two marketplaces we talk about. The comparable marketplace, which I would align more closely with the old traditional collective bargaining world, that, here's the 5, 6 communities that we've always looked at for bargaining purposes, and then the other one being the competitive marketplace. There's a lot of overlap between the two, but trying to think of examples, immediately here. But like when I get down to the Madison area, if I was working with a city of Portage or, one of the other outlying communities that are really close, that, the conversation often lends itself to that, well, here's what we've compared ourselves to, but we don't want to compare to Madison. But in reality, that's who you're competing with, in that neck of the woods. And so the question is, who are you competing with here that may be the draw or causing you not to get the employees that you're seeking or retain the employees? And so it's a balance between the two, but yeah, we would have that list and you would have complete input on that process.
Okay. Thank you. That's all I've got.
Mr. Bemke, is there any other people that you are seeking to ask questions of then?
Sure, as long as you're asking, if I'm asking, Sue, do you have anything? Very good. I'm satisfied, thank you.
Satisfied with just being able to ask questions or satisfied overall? Okay, with that being said, I'll kind of pull this back together as far as no specific questions or no lingering questions prior to coming to the meeting. Is there anything moving forward? What are we looking at for a time frame? What are we looking at needing to do tonight as far as the committee is concerned? If the committee is interested in moving forward, what are we looking at with that? Patrick, will you kind of address what we've got for a timeline with us?
Well, I think the first decision, so if this was approved, and I don't know if this is the final approval or if it needs to go to council, that's you're in charge of your own politics. But whenever final approval would be reached, that the first order of business is for us to get job documentation going, whether it is employees completing a job description questionnaire, which we can provide, and there's a online presentation so employees can view that in their office, at their home, wherever they're working, they can view that, or if it's job descriptions. But for us to analyze the jobs, that would be the first order of business to get that rolling very quickly. And at the same time, we would start collecting market data. And I think that there are certain communities that are low-hanging fruit that we would just start collecting if we don't already have some or most of the data. Stevens Point is a good example. Marshfield is a good example, that you almost make those assumptions even without council blessing, knowing that those are typical. And then make some guesses in terms of what else might be, so we can at least have a sufficient amount of data while we're awaiting that decision on what that comparable pool looks like.
Unfortunately, you guys keep cutting in and out for me. I can hear a lot of what you're saying. I don't know if you can still hear me.
Yes, we can hear you. Oh, sorry. But in terms of then, that process, eats up a bunch of time. The collecting the data, analyzing the jobs, once we have that job documentation in our hands. And then usually about a month and a half after we receive the job documentation, we try to come back and meet with the department heads or the key managers to talk about, here's what we're seeing in the jobs, this doesn't make sense, or this is a unique job, help us understand it better, asking questions about, what are your recruitment or retention challenges, are you do you believe that there are internal pay discrepancies? So that's also part, but that I would say about halfway through, if I'm looking for a marker, our goal in this is to absolutely have numbers in your hands by the time budget rolls around, so you have something you can plug in and plan for. And so usually, and I'm trying to use fake markers here, but about 2/3 of the way through the process is when we would come back to either the committee or the council, say, here's where we are, and understand that there would be, with this work group you're putting together, there would be meetings leading up to that kind of, here's what we're thinking about, here's how it looks, so on and so forth, to lead up to that. And once we kind of had the council on board with, here's the type of structure we're looking at, here's what the market looks like, so you have a sense of kind of where you line up in comparison to your current pay structure versus what the market's looking like. If, in some cases, and I'll just kind of throw a wrinkle into this, that sometimes a client will say, well, we're not quite certain. We want to test the waters with a couple of the larger communities. Are they, and we can sometimes model, here's what a pay plan looks like with the larger communities included. Here's what a pay plan looks like without them included, and kind of show, how the pay plan might differ. But again, from a timeline standpoint, I presume in many organizations, even now, this time of year, you're starting to talk a little bit about budget, but by the time late summer rolls around, you're in full head of steam. So I would say probably with the goal of September, mid to late September trying to be done, or at least as done as possible, where you would have meaningful and realistic numbers for budget, knowing that there might be some things that trickle in at the very end.
Thank you. That's a pretty good idea for time frame, and that is, something that if we're looking at it, implementing this is something where we don't want to kick down the road until July or August and then try and do this, because we're not going to have budgetary figures to be able to guesstimate for that. Anything further from the committee or anybody else as we move on this particular item? Otherwise, I'll make a motion for approval unless anybody sees anything else crazy with the contractor, with the drafted contract in front of us. The one as I'm making the motion now, I shouldn't be making the motion because I'm asking a question, but is this something where the committee has a pleasure of letting Mr. Ryan Hartman choose the individual participants for this and this focus group that is going to make this decision between Mr. Hartman and our mayor? Or is this something where the committee wants to be involved in choosing those people? I don't know if I am qualified to choose the people for the focus group. I'd rather have our HR manager do that.
The only thing I would offer is that there's going to be a new committee. And I don't see why the committee shouldn't be involved. I know I would want to be if I wasn't done in 2 weeks.
Oh, I'm sorry. As far as, because there's going to be the middle management or upper management staff members, like a focus group in this, that are going to be involved with, kind of working with this, not necessarily the committee. Patrick, give me, we touched on this earlier. I think Deb touched on it, but it's a case where there's going to be certain individuals, whether they're department heads or whether they're middle. Sounds like our foundation of employees probably isn't going to be in that mix, but it's going to be, department heads and other positions with that. So how do other municipalities do that, Patrick?
I think having an employee working group is incredibly helpful for laying the foundational framework for the policy questions that need to be talked about. But there comes a point in the process where it becomes a policy decision that needs to be made, and I would presume that it starts with this committee and works its way to council. And so at some point, that, and whether maybe that, that I refer to that 2/3 of the way through the process, I call it a mid-project update, but I should call it the 2/3 of the way process. It's easier to say the mid-project update. That I would envision being with this committee and or the council. Kind of, here's where you stand, here's our general or our initial recommendations as it relates to the type of pay plan, the market, and those sorts of things. But that foundational work being done before we would show up for that. So department, I would envision probably maybe having one near the beginning of the project with the staff work group near the beginning of the project. Probably have one to coincide with the department interviews, saying, here's what we're here for, and here's kind of our initial findings. And then maybe another one. And I would, many of these, the department head one, I feel very strongly need to be on site. I much prefer having that face-to-face interaction. I know these things sometimes make it a little bit difficult, in this world, but I much prefer being on site for those meetings. And then maybe another virtual meeting with that group just to kind of, here's what we're going to go into the committee with. Are we all on the same page? But again, the policy decisions need to be made by the elected decision makers.
Correct, and I apologize. Maybe I kind of exacerbated an issue that wasn't an issue. To satisfy your concern, Mr. Zerflu, absolutely. This body, the HR committee, is going to be involved. So if there is a draft suggestion of the wages or whatever, we're going to have that ability to review that and to answer into that and have final decision on that.
And I think this conversation is coming full circle as well as really what I walked into regarding the appeals process. In my experience is when you have an employee working group, such as what we're talking about here, the appeals are even fewer because you've had that sounding board where they're watching out or they're identifying those potential traps. And so again, forcing us at the beginning of the process or during the process to, hey, pay special attention to this job. It's kind of a tricky one for us over the years, dig into it a little bit more. So again, when you have that team of people with that kind of the second, third, fourth set of eyes, that back-end appeals process becomes less important because you've had the buy-in and the communications during the project.
Sure, thank you. And Mr. Zerflu, even though your term is going to be ending here, this is a case where I can establish some form of homework that you can give us as we progress through the summertime. That if you're willing to offer any input, that would be wonderful. I'll take that under consideration anytime.
I'll be there whenever you need me, Thad. My specific point was, though, like, the committee wasn't even going to approve the employees who are going to be on this. But, I mean, whatever.
Yeah, so could Deb or Ryan maybe describe, we had a conversation a little bit this afternoon about this committee. Could maybe Deb or Ryan describe who the committee is going to be made up of, or what they envision, what their responsibilities are, and how they're going to work through that?
Sure, I'll start, and then Deb.
Ryan, I'll let you, I was going to let you say, Ryan, talk to it, and then I can fill in the blank.
Perfect, you read my mind. Yeah, so as Patrick alluded to before, I think we would have, or Deb did as well, we'd have somebody from finance on the compensation committee, a supervisory role, probably from DPW, and then the other department heads, so that we have a real feel for what is going on from the different departments that will be in this wage study. And like Patrick said, then we'd be able to work through those issues before it got to, the department heads are going to be the subject matter experts on saying this position is kind of a tricky one because the title is XYZ, but they really do a little bit more of ABC. So, it's more of a position of, so on and so forth, and we really need to look carefully at that. And then the 5 to 7 of us individuals would work through and say, okay, here's where we're landing with this. This is more of a, X example, and where does this truly land, or where has it been? We could be looking at positions that maybe haven't been looked at in quite some time. So the positions were something 5 years ago, and there's something now that is only 50% of what they were 5 years ago, and it's something totally different. It's evolved into something. So this committee, I guess for lack of a better term, will be a group of subject matter experts from different areas that'll be working through potential pitfalls that we can see and try to get ahead of this or stay ahead of this right from the get-go. Deb, where am I offline on this?
You are right on target, and I would just add that the committee then is also going to be working with the HR committee to keep you in the loop on things as well, on where things are and the hot spots. And that committee is also then going to be working with the department heads to keep that transparency and communication going, because that's going to be the really important thing. And as Patrick talked to it, we have to, it's in order for this to be successful and people to have a clear understanding, we need to stay transparent. At the end of the day, they may not always like what they hear, but at least they understand and would agree that it was a fair process with it. So I think that that committee also plays that role of also being the advocates of we're looking at this holistically. It's not by department, and one department has preference over another department. We're kind of looking at it from the whole organization, so that the departments also then get a better understanding of what's happening within the other departments, so that they see where that equity of positions, even though they might have different titles, but roles and responsibilities as far as education need and technical and those kinds of things. So it also just helps us open up the door to have department heads and everybody else look at things more globally as opposed to within their specific department.
Mr. Zerflu, does that answer that even further? That clarified a little bit for me too, because I was kind of, I didn't know how this I couldn't answer your question because I didn't know how it operated. So.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, everything's subject to the committee's approval. I mean, I totally understand that. My preference would be the committee's a little more involved in this. Wages are a sensitive subject for a lot of people. That was just kind of my point, but, yeah, it makes sense.
Well, moving forward, would that be something where we would have Deb and Ryan create a list, and then like next month or whatever, we could approve this and get stuff going moving forward, but then the committee would actually approve the pool of people that would be involved in that, or is?
Well, any major step of the process, I think the committee should approve. And I, as an employee, if I was a city employee, I would consider that an important step. You know what I mean? Because there are going to be people wanting to know why there's no rank and file employees on this committee. That's going to come up. We know that. So, the reasons why you might not want to do that, I think were explained adequately.
Yeah, I guess looking at it, if we had an infinite amount of time, if we had an infinite amount of resources, then that's when we would need input from everybody. But I'm wondering if that's a case where, yeah, if it's, specifically rank and file, there is a concern about, a specific job description or pay, but then is there an awareness of everything as far as organization is concerned? So maybe, I guess. I'm not opposed to anything. So, if that's something where the committee, it wants to, look at the pool and approve that, or if the committee just wants to go ahead and have, our HR manager and Deb, and potentially the mayor choose the 7 or 8 or whatever employee focus group to talk with us. I don't.
Well, and Ryan always has. Like we have an update as the next agenda item. I don't doubt that is going to happen, that we're going to be in the know. And I think that's fine. If something happens the committee doesn't like, they can't intervene. They're the Human Resources Committee. So I'm satisfied with that.
Any other questions, concerns by anybody else? Otherwise, I will now officially make the motion for approval. Motion on the floor by Kubaschak, second by Zerflu to approve, and I'll read this because we've been discussing this for a little while here. Motion to approve a professional services agreement with Carlson Detman Consulting to provide a classification and compensation study for non-represented positions within the city. All those in, any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it, 3-0. We will move on to item number 4, HR Department update. Mr. Ryan Hartman, will you brief us?
Yes, just briefly. COVID vaccine updates are becoming more and more, we are becoming more and more eligible, more available. The mayor, along with myself, we've started to get calls from local pharmacies just saying, hey, as these pharmacies are also calling other employers, just saying we are starting to get more shipments in. If you would like to just let your employees know, so on and so forth. So we've noticed a pretty good turnout or pretty good response in regards to that when employees find out we're going out and just letting them know this can be available to you. Here's the steps you go to go get that first dose of the vaccine, and the response has been very favorable to date. And then I think that's all I have for the vaccine updates. Does anybody have any questions? And then lastly was just, I believe, new employee update I have on there. As a bulleted point, we had 2 new employees start this past Monday in DPW. There will be a couple more starting in approximately 3 weeks, I believe May 3rd. So 4 weeks would be the next start date for 2 more employees within DPW. And again, that goes back to their new hires are based on, I believe, back to October, November HR committees when we talked about the pending and upcoming retirements. Those retirements are now such taking place, and their replacements have been hired, and they are in that process. So trying to continue moving forward without really missing a beat. So it's kind of a good, fun, and exciting time here at the city right now, and a lot of things are taking place in a positive way. So that's all I have.
Any questions or concerns for Mr. Ryan Hartman? With that said, we will move toward adjournment. I want to quick say a thank you to Mr. Joe Zerflu for his last HR committee meeting. You are actually my favorite HR committee member. So I just wanted to leave you with that, Mr. Zerflu.
Thank you, Thad, I appreciate it.
Good. With that, I'll make a motion for adjournment. Motion on the floor by Kubiszek, second by Zerflu. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. Meeting is adjourned at 4:38. Thank you, everybody.
Goodbye.